They called him the God of Silence, a man who owned the police, the judges, and the streets of Chicago. Lorenzo Moretti didn't have weaknesses, or so everyone thought. But on a freezing November night at the most exclusive gala of the year, the world discovered his only vulnerability: his mother. As the city's elite watched a cruel socialite force the confused elderly woman to her knees, Lorenzo did something terrified onlookers didn't expect. He waited. He watched, until a girl with holes in her shoes and nothing to lose stepped between the wolf and the lamb. This is the story of how a $20 an hour maid saved the soul of a monster. The grand ballroom of the Palmer House Hilton in downtown Chicago smelled of old money, expensive perfume, and underlying rot. It was the annual Winter Solstice Charity Gala, a masquerade for the city's predators to pretend they were saints. Crystal chandeliers, weighing as much as small cars, cast a fractured golden light over 300 guests holding flutes of Dom Perignon. High above them, on the shadowed mezzanine balcony, Lorenzo Moretti stood like a gargoyle carved from obsidian. He didn't drink. He didn't smile. He adjusted the cuffs of his bespoke Brioni suit, his eyes scanning the floor with the predatory focus of a shark in shallow water. At 32, Lorenzo was the don of the Moretti crime family. To the public, he was a logistics magnate. To the underworld, he was simply the architect. He built empires and demolished enemies with equal efficiency. "Sir," his bodyguard, a massive man named Silas, whispered into his earpiece, "Your mother has wandered away from the VIP table again. Nurse Hopkins is looking for her." Lorenzo's jaw tightened. "Find her, Silas. Gently. If anyone touches her, break their hand." "Understood, ma'am." Lorenzo looked down, searching for the small, fragile figure of Isabella Moretti. His mother was suffering from early-onset dementia. Most days, she thought she was still a 19-year-old seamstress in Sicily. Tonight, Lorenzo had brought her out against his better judgment because she had cried, begging to see the pretty lights and the music. He couldn't say no to her. He never could. Down on the floor, the atmosphere was suffocating for Sophie Clark. Sophie adjusted the heavy silver tray of hors d'oeuvres, her arms aching. She was 23, invisible and exhausted. Her uniform, a generic black dress and white apron provided by the staffing agency, was a size too big, pinned awkwardly at the waist. She had been on her feet for 10 hours. Her rent was overdue, and her younger brother, Toby, needed an inhaler refill she couldn't afford until this shift was paid out. "Champagne, sir." "Madame," Sophie murmured, weaving through the crowd. She was a ghost to these people, a prop that held food. Near the center of the room, a commotion began to ripple through the crowd. The low hum of conversation spiked into sharp whispers. Sophie turned and saw an elderly woman in a vintage, slightly out-of-style velvet gown stumbling near the chocolate fountain. It was Isabella. She looked terrified, clutching a small beaded purse like a lifeline. The crowd parted around her, not to help, but to avoid contamination. Standing directly in Isabella's path was Beatrice Vane. Beatrice was the wife of a corrupt senator, a woman whose face was pulled tight by surgery and whose heart was harder than the diamonds around her neck. She was holding a glass of red wine, laughing loudly at a joke someone had made. Isabella, confused by the lights and the noise, reached out. "Matteo," she whispered, mistaking a waiter for her late husband. She stumbled. Her hand flailed and struck Beatrice's arm. The glass of red wine tipped. It was like a gunshot in a library. The dark crimson liquid splashed across the front of Beatrice's pristine white Givenchy gown. The music didn't stop, but the silence around them was absolute. Beatrice stared at her dress, her mouth dropping open in a silent scream of rage. She looked up at Isabella, her eyes bulging. "You stupid, senile old hag!" Beatrice shrieked, a voice cutting through the ambient noise. Isabella flinched, shrinking into herself. I'm sorry. The floor. It moved." "Sorry? Beatrice stepped forward, looming over the smaller woman. "Do you know what this is? This is silk. It's worth more than your entire pathetic life." From the balcony, Lorenzo gripped the railing. The metal groaned under the pressure of his hands. He took a step towards the stairs, his blood running cold. But he paused. He saw the security guards moving in, but they were hesitating. Beatrice Vane was powerful. No one wanted to offend the senator's wife. Lorenzo wanted to see who, in this room of 300 friends and allies, would help his mother. "Show me," he thought, darker than the night outside. "Show me who deserves to survive the night." Beatrice wasn't finished. She grabbed Isabella's arm, her nails digging into the elderly woman's thin skin. "You ruined my night. You're going to fix it." "Please," Isabella whimpered, tears welling in her cloudy eyes. "I just want to go home." "You're not going anywhere until you clean this up," Beatrice hissed. She pointed a manicured finger at the floor where a few drops of wine had spattered the marble. "Get on your knees. Use that rag you call a shawl. Wipe it up." The crowd watched. Men in tuxedos, women in pearls. They all just watched. It was a spectacle to them. A game. "I said, get on your knees." Beatrice shoved Isabella. Isabella's knees buckled. She began to sink toward the cold, hard floor, sobbing softly. I'm sorry. Lorenzo felt a rage so pure it nearly blinded him. He reached inside his jacket for the gun he wasn't supposed to have. He was going to kill Beatrice Vane in the middle of the Palmer House ballroom. Consequences be damned. But before he could move, a blur of black and white shot across the floor. Sophie didn't think. She didn't calculate the risk. She just saw her own grandmother in the terrified eyes of the woman being bullied. The tray of hors d'oeuvres hit a side table with a clatter, spilling crab cakes everywhere. Sophie sprinted the last 10 feet and slid between Beatrice and Isabella, just as the older woman was about to hit the floor. Sophie caught Isabella, wrapping her strong, work-hardened arms around the frail shoulders, holding her up. "Don't you dare touch her," Sophie said. Her voice was shaking, but it was loud enough to be heard. Beatrice blinked, stunned. She looked at the maid as if a cockroach had just spoken to her. "Excuse me? Do you know who I am? Get out of my way, you little servant." Sophie didn't budge. She could feel Isabella trembling against her chest, a bird caught in a storm. "I don't care who you are," Sophie said, her heart hammering against her ribs. "She's confused, she's scared, and you are bullying an elderly woman over a piece of fabric. Have you no shame?" The gasp from the crowd was audible. A maid lecturing Beatrice Vane? It was social suicide. Beatrice's face turned a violent shade of red. "Manager!" she screamed. "Where is the manager? I want this girl fired. I want her arrested." The hotel manager, a sweating man named Mr. Henderson, came running over, my nun, looking pale. "Mrs. Vane, I am so sorry." "Fire her!" Beatrice shrieked, pointing a shaking finger at Sophie. "And throw this old witch out on the street." Sophie tightened her grip on Isabella. "It's okay," she whispered into Isabella's ear, ignoring the screaming socialite. "I've got you. Nobody is going to hurt you." Beatrice, fueled by the lack of immediate obedience, grabbed a glass of champagne from a passing waiter who had frozen in the chaos. "You want to help the trash? Then you can smell like it too." With a vicious sneer, Beatrice threw the champagne. Sophie saw it coming. She spun around, shielding Isabella with her own body. The sticky, cold liquid hit Sophie squarely in the face and chest, soaking her hair and dripping down her apron. She gasped from the shock of the cold but didn't let go of Isabella. "There!" Beatrice laughed, looking around for validation from her peers. "Now the help matches the hag." Sophie wiped champagne from her eyes. She stood tall, dignity radiating from her despite the mess. She looked Beatrice dead in the eye. "If making me wet makes you feel powerful, ma'am, then I feel sorry for you. Your dress is ruined, but your character was clearly ruined long before tonight." Silence. Absolute, terrifying silence. Beatrice raised her hand to slap Sophie. "You insolent, Beatrice. The name was spoken softly, but it carried across the ballroom like the crack of a whip. It came from the grand staircase. Every head turned. The crowd parted like the Red Sea. Lorenzo Moretti was descending the stairs. He moved slowly, one step at a time. His face was unreadable, a mask of cold, beautiful marble. But his eyes were burning with a fire that promised ash and ruin. He didn't look at the crowd. He didn't look at the manager. He walked straight into the circle, his polished shoes making no sound. Beatrice Vane's hand froze in mid-air. Her arrogance evaporated instantly, replaced by a primal fear. Everyone knew Lorenzo Moretti. Everyone knew that if you crossed him, you didn't just lose your money. You disappeared. Lorenzo stopped 3 feet from them. He looked at Beatrice. Then he looked at the manager. Finally, his gaze landed on Sophie. He saw the champagne dripping from her chin. He saw the fierce, protective way she held his mother. He saw the fear in her eyes, warring with a stubborn bravery that he hadn't seen in years. He stepped closer to Sophie. She flinched, expecting another attack. Lorenzo reached out. Sophie squeezed her eyes shut, bracing for a blow. But he didn't strike her. With a gentleness that shocked the room, Lorenzo took a silk handkerchief from his breast pocket. He reached out and dabbed a drop of champagne from Sophie's cheek. "What is your name?" he asked, his voice a low rumble that vibrated in her chest. Sophie opened her eyes. She was looking up into the darkest, most intense eyes she had ever seen. "Sophie," she whispered. "Sophie Clark." Lorenzo nodded slowly. He turned his gaze to his mother. "Mama," he said softly. "Are you hurt?" Isabella looked up, her face brightening. "Enzo, this nice girl. She caught me. She stopped the floor from moving." "I know, Mama. I saw." Lorenzo turned to Beatrice Vane. The temperature in the room seemed to drop 10 degrees. "Mrs. Vane," Lorenzo said. His voice was polite, which made it terrifying. "You seem to have mistaken my mother for someone who tolerates disrespect. And you seem to have mistaken this young woman," he gestured to Sophie, "for someone without a protector." Beatrice was trembling so hard her jewelry rattled. "Mr. Moretti, I didn't know. I thought she was just some... nobody. Nobody." Lorenzo stepped into Beatrice's personal space. She smelled of fear and expensive wine. "You just humiliated the woman who gave me life, and you assaulted the only person in this room with enough honor to stand up to you." Lorenzo turned to the manager. "Mr. Henderson." Yes, Mr. Moretti?" "Mrs. Vane is leaving." "Now." Lorenzo didn't shout. He didn't have to. "And if she is ever allowed into any establishment you oversee in this city again, I will buy the building and burn it to the ground with you inside. Do we understand each other?" Yes, of course, Mr. Moretti." The manager frantically waved for security. "Escort Mrs. Vane out. Immediately." As Beatrice was dragged away, sobbing and pleading, Lorenzo turned back to Sophie. She was shivering, partly from the cold champagne, partly from adrenaline. She started to pull away. I should go. I'm going to get fired for this." "No," Lorenzo said. He took off his tuxedo jacket. It was heavy, warm, and smelled of sandalwood and power. He draped it over Sophie's wet shoulders. It swallowed her small frame. "You're not fired, Sophie Clark," Lorenzo said, buttoning the jacket at her neck, his knuckles brushing her skin. "In fact, you just got a promotion." Sophie looked up at him, bewildered. I don't understand." Lorenzo offered his arm to his mother on one side, and then, to the shock of the entire city of Chicago, he offered his other arm to the champagne-soaked Maid. "Walk with me," he commanded, though it sounded like a plea. "We have much to discuss." As they walked out of the ballroom, leaving a stunned silence in their wake, Sophie had no idea that she had just walked out of her old life and into the lion's den. And the lion was hungry. The air outside the Palmer house was biting, a typical Chicago wind that sliced through clothing, but Sophie barely felt it. She was encased in Lorenzo Moretti's tuxedo jacket, a garment that cost more than her entire year's earnings. A sleek, armored Mercedes Maybach pulled up to the curb with the silent grace of a panther. Silas, the massive bodyguard from the balcony, opened the rear door. "Get in," Lorenzo said. It wasn't a question. Sophie hesitated on the sidewalk. The adrenaline was fading, replaced by a cold dread. She had just publicly shamed a senator's wife and walked off with the city's most dangerous criminal. "Mr. Moretti, I really should go home. My shift is over." "The agency will be worried," Lorenzo looked at her, his eyes dark under the streetlights. "The agency has already been informed that you are no longer in their employ. You are with me now." "What?" Sophie took a step back. "You can't just—" "Sophie," Isabella's voice drifted from inside the car. The elderly woman was already seated, wrapped in a cashmere blanket Silas had produced. "Please, dear, the dark scares me. I need someone to hold my hand." Sophie looked at the old woman. Isabella's eyes were wide and pleading. Then she looked at Lorenzo. His face was impassive, but his hand was holding the door open, waiting. "My brother," Sophie said, her voice small. "I have to get home to my brother. He's sick. He's waiting for me." "We will handle it," Lorenzo said. "Get in the car, Sophie." Sophie realized she had two choices: run and likely be hunted down, or get in the car and see where this rabbit hole went. She looked at Isabella again. With a sigh of defeat, she climbed into the back seat. The interior of the car smelled of rich leather and scotch. Lorenzo slid in beside her, the door closing with a heavy, pressurized thump that sealed them off from the world. As the car merged into traffic, silence filled the cabin. Sophie sat stiffly, her hands folded in her lap, stained with sticky champagne. Isabella immediately reached out and took Sophie's hand, humming a soft Italian lullaby. Lorenzo watched them from the opposite seat. He was analyzing Sophie, dissecting her like a complex business deal. He saw the scuffed black shoes, the red, chapped knuckles of a girl who scrubbed floors for a living, and the hollows under her cheekbones that spoke of skipped meals. "Why did you do it?" Lorenzo asked suddenly, breaking the silence. Sophie jumped slightly. "Do what?" "Step in. You knew who Beatrice Vane was. Everyone knows. You knew you would lose your job. Why risk it for a stranger?" Sophie looked down at Isabella's hand resting in hers. "She reminded me of my grandmother," she said softly. "She had dementia, too. People treated her like furniture. Like she wasn't a person anymore just because her memory was fading." Sophie looked up, her eyes flashing with a sudden spark of defiance. "It's not right. Nobody deserves to be humiliated just because they're confused." Lorenzo studied her. In his world, loyalty was bought, and altruism was a myth. People only acted when they had something to gain. But this girl, this starving, terrified girl, had thrown herself in front of a social predator for nothing. "You have a fire in you, Sophie Clark," Lorenzo murmured. "I like it." He pressed a button on the console. A glass partition slid up, separating them from the driver. "Let's talk business." "I'm a maid, Mr. Moretti. I don't have business with the head of the Moretti crime family." Lorenzo's lips quirked in a humorless smile. "You know who I am." "Good. That saves time. I need a caretaker for my mother." Sophie blinked. "You have nurses. I saw them." "I have employees," Lorenzo corrected. "I have people who watch her to earn a paycheck. They are cold, clinical. They are afraid of her because they are afraid of me. Tonight, you were not afraid. You protected her. You treated her with dignity." He leaned forward, his elbows resting on his knees. "I want to hire you, exclusively. You will live at the estate. You will be her companion. You will ensure she never feels scared or alone again." Sophie shook her head. "I can't. I have Toby. He's 16. I'm his legal guardian. I can't just move into a mob boss's house." "Bring him." Sophie froze. "Excuse me?" "Bring the boy," Lorenzo said, as casually as if he were ordering coffee. The estate is 10 acres. There is plenty of room. I assume he is still in school. We have a driver who can take him. And if he is sick, as you said, my private physician is one of the best in the country." Sophie's heart hammered against her ribs. It was a deal with the devil. She knew it. But she thought of the stack of final notice letters on her kitchen counter. She thought of Toby's wheezing at night because they couldn't afford the good inhalers. She thought of the leaky roof in their apartment in the bad part of town. "How much?" she asked, her voice trembling. Lorenzo didn't blink. $10,000 a month, plus room, board, and all medical expenses for your brother. Sophie's mouth went dry. 10,000. That was more than she made in 6 months. It was freedom. It was safety. But it was also a trap. "What's the catch?" she whispered. Lorenzo's eyes locked onto hers, intense and possessive. "The catch is that you belong to the family now. You live in my house. You follow my rules. And the most important rule is simple. What happens in the Moretti estate stays in the Moretti estate. You see nothing. You hear nothing. You speak to no one outside without my permission." He extended a hand. "Do we have a deal, Sophie?" Sophie looked at his hand, large, manicured, dangerous. Then she looked at Isabella, who was asleep on her shoulder. She took his hand. His grip was warm and firm. "Deal," she whispered. Lorenzo didn't let go immediately. He held her hand for a second longer than necessary. "Good. Welcome home, Sophie." The Moretti estate was not a house. It was a fortress disguised as a mansion. Located in the affluent suburb of Lake Forest, it was surrounded by 12-foot stone walls topped with electrified fencing. As the car passed through the massive iron gates, Sophie saw men patrolling the grounds with German shepherds. They wore suits, but the bulges under their jackets were unmistakable. "Is this necessary?" Sophie asked, looking out the window. "I have many enemies," Lorenzo replied simply. "Safety is an illusion, unless you enforce it." The car stopped in front of a sprawling Gothic revival mansion made of grey stone. It looked imposing, almost haunted, backlit by the moon. Silas opened the door. "We're here, boss." Lorenzo stepped out and helped his mother down. Isabella woke up, looking around confusedly. "Are we in Rome, Enzo?" "No, Mama, we're home. Go with Nurse Hopkins." A stern-looking woman in scrubs was waiting at the entrance. She looked terrified as she approached Lorenzo. "Sir, I am so sorry I lost her at the gala. We will discuss your incompetence later," Lorenzo said, his voice slicing through the cold air. "Take her to bed. If she wakes up distressed tonight, you are fired before sunrise." The nurse paled, grabbed Isabella's arm, and hurried her inside. Lorenzo turned to Sophie. She was standing by the car, looking small and overwhelmed in the massive driveway. "Come, Silas will fetch your brother in the morning. Tonight, you stay here." "I can't leave Toby alone tonight," Sophie protested. "He'll worry." "He has already been contacted," Lorenzo said, walking toward the massive oak front doors. "One of my men went to your apartment. He gave Toby a phone to call you. He is safe. There is a guard outside your door right now." Sophie stopped dead. "You sent men to my house? Without asking me?" Lorenzo stopped and turned slowly. "I am a thorough man, Sophie. I needed to verify your story, and I needed to ensure my new investment wasn't going to run away." "I'm not an investment," Sophie snapped, her fatigue giving way to anger. "I'm a person." Lorenzo stepped closer, towering over her. "In this house, you are what I say you are. Now come inside. It's freezing." Sophie followed him, fuming but helpless. The interior of the mansion was breathtakingly cold. Marble floors, high ceilings, expensive art that looked like it belonged in a museum, but no photos, no warmth. It felt like a mausoleum for the living. Lorenzo led her into a library that smelled of old paper and cigar smoke. A fire was crackling in the hearth, the only source of warmth she had felt in hours. "Sit," he commanded, pointing to a leather armchair. Sophie sat. She watched as Lorenzo walked to a mahogany desk and poured 2 glasses of amber liquid. He handed one to her. "Brandy. It will help with the shock." Sophie took the glass but didn't drink. "So what now? Do I sign a contract in blood?" Lorenzo chuckled, a low, dark sound. He picked up a manila folder from his desk and tossed it into her lap. "Open it." Sophie opened the folder. Her breath hitched. It was her life. There were photos of her walking to work, photos of Toby at school, copies of her overdue electric bills, a copy of her father's death certificate from a construction accident 5 years ago, an accident where the company never paid out. "How?" Sophie looked up, horrified. "How do you have all this? We've only known each other for an hour." "I have a team of analysts who can find the history of a ghost in 10 minutes, Lorenzo said, leaning against the desk. "I know everything, Sophie. I know you dropped out of nursing school to take care of Toby when your father died. I know you have $42,000 in debt. I know your landlord, Mr. Russo, has been threatening to evict you by Friday." He took a sip of his brandy, watching her over the rim of the glass. "You are drowning, Sophie. I am the lifeboat." Sophie felt naked. All her secrets, her shame, her struggles, laid out on paper for this billionaire criminal to judge. "Why are you doing this?" she asked, her voice cracking. "You could hire anyone. Why go to this trouble for a maid?" Lorenzo set his glass down. He walked around the desk and stood in front of her. He reached out and tilted her chin up, so she had to look at him. "Because when Beatrice Vane threw that champagne, you didn't flinch," he said softly. "You didn't look for an exit. You stood your ground. Loyalty like that is rare. It cannot be taught. It must be born." His thumb brushed her lower lip, a gesture that was shockingly intimate. Sophie stopped breathing. "I need someone I can trust with my mother's life," Lorenzo said. "My enemies would love to use her against me. They would hurt her to get to me. I need a guard dog, Sophie. One that looks like a lamb, but bites like a wolf. I think that is you." He pulled back and picked up a pen. He placed a document on the table next to her. The contract. It outlines the salary, the benefits, and the confidentiality agreement. It also states that if you betray me, the consequences will be severe. Sophie looked at the paper. It was her salvation. It was Toby's future. It was also the end of her freedom. She thought of the cold apartment. She thought of Beatrice Vane laughing at her. She thought of the way Lorenzo had put his jacket around her. She picked up the pen. "I have one condition," she said, her hand hovering over the paper. Lorenzo raised an eyebrow. "You are in no position to bargain, but go ahead. Amuse me." "I want to finish my nursing degree," she said, "online, at night, when Isabella is asleep. You pay for the tuition." Lorenzo stared at her for a long moment. Then a genuine smile touched his lips, not the cold smirk from before, but something real. It transformed his face, making him devastatingly handsome. "Done," he said. Sophie signed the paper. "Welcome to the family," Lorenzo said. He took the paper and locked it in a drawer. "Now, go to sleep. Your room is on the 3rd floor, 2nd door on the left. Do not wander. The motion sensors are active." Sophie stood up, her legs shaky. She walked to the door but paused. "Mr. Moretti." "Lorenzo," he corrected, his back turned to her as he poured another drink. "Call me Lorenzo." "Lorenzo." She tested the name. It felt heavy on her tongue. "Thank you for the jacket." "Good night, Sophie." Sophie walked out into the silent hallway. As she climbed the grand staircase, she didn't see the shadows moving in the corners. She didn't know that by signing that paper she had just put a target on her back. Lorenzo wasn't just hiring a maid. He was bringing a weakness into his fortress. And in the Chicago underworld, weakness was blood in the water. Inside the library, Lorenzo watched the security feed on his monitor. He watched Sophie enter her room and lock the door. He pulled out his phone and dialed a number. "It's done," Lorenzo said into the phone. "She's in. Dig deeper into her background. I want to know if she has any ex-boyfriends, any distant relatives, anyone who could be used as leverage against her. If there is anyone, remove them. He hung up and stared into the fire. The game had changed, and for the first time in years, Lorenzo Moretti wasn't sure if he was the player or the pawn. 3 weeks had passed since the night of the gala. The Moretti estate had a rhythm, one that Sophie was slowly learning to dance to. Her days were spent with Isabella. Surprisingly, the elderly woman flourished under Sophie's care. They spent mornings in the heated conservatory, pruning orchids. Sophie would play old Italian vinyl records she found in the attic, and for hours Isabella would be lucid, recounting stories of the Amalfi Coast, of lemon groves, and of a boy named Matteo who stole her heart. Sophie's brother, Toby, had adjusted less smoothly. He was living in the guest wing, surrounded by every video game console imaginable, gifts from Lorenzo, but he was wary. "This isn't normal, Soph," he'd whispered during their dinners. "These guys, they have guns under their coats. I saw the gardener cleaning a pistol in the shed." "We're safe, Toby," Sophie would assure him, though she wasn't entirely sure herself. "Just focus on your schoolwork. The tutors Mr. Moretti hired are expensive." Lorenzo was a ghost. Sophie rarely saw him. He left before dawn and returned long after the house was asleep. But his presence was everywhere, in the fresh flowers that appeared in her room, in the specific nursing textbooks that arrived by courier, and in the way the guards watched her with newfound respect. One stormy Tuesday evening, the routine broke. Sophie was in the kitchen making herbal tea for Isabella. The house was quiet, save for the drumming of rain against the reinforced glass. She turned around and gasped. Lorenzo was sitting at the small kitchen island, watching her. He had discarded his suit jacket. His white shirt was unbuttoned at the collar, revealing a glimpse of a dark tattoo on his chest. He looked exhausted, his eyes rimmed with red. "I didn't hear you come in," Sophie said, her hand going to her throat. "I know how to move quietly," Lorenzo said, his voice raspy. "It's a survival skill." He gestured to the teapot. "Is there enough for 2? Sophie nodded and poured him a cup. She slid it across the marble counter. He took it, his fingers brushing hers. The electric shock was still there, stronger than before. "How is she?" Lorenzo asked, staring into the steam. "She's having a good week," Sophie said softly. "She remembered your birthday is coming up. She wants to bake a cake. She keeps asking if you like lemon." Lorenzo looked up, surprised. "She remembers my birthday? She hasn't remembered that in 3 years." "She remembers how you felt," Sophie said. "She says you were always a serious boy, that you carried the world on your shoulders even when you were 10. Lorenzo let out a bitter laugh. "She's not wrong. My father died when I was 10. I became the man of the house that day." He looked at Sophie, really looked at her. She was wearing a simple, oversized sweater and leggings, her hair in a messy bun. She looked domestic, warm, everything his life wasn't. "You look tired, Sophie. Is my mother too much trouble?" "No," Sophie said quickly. "I love her. She's the grandmother I wish I still had." But? Lorenzo's eyes narrowed. "I'm worried about Toby," she admitted. "He feels like a prisoner. He can't leave the grounds without an escort. He's 16. He wants to go to the movies, hang out with friends." Lorenzo took a sip of tea. "The Salvaro family has put a price on my head, Sophie. $5 million. If Toby walks out that gate alone, he will be snatched within the hour to get to me, or to get to you." Sophie went pale. "To get to me? You are important to my mother," Lorenzo said, his gaze intense. "That makes you a weakness, and my enemies exploit weakness." He stood up and walked around the island, crowding her space. The kitchen suddenly felt very small. "I told you, Sophie. You are in the spider's web now. You can't just fly away." He reached out and tucked a loose strand of hair behind her ear. His touch was scorching. Sophie forgot how to breathe. "But don't worry," Lorenzo whispered. leaning down so his lips were inches from hers. "I am a very possessive spider. I don't let anyone touch what is mine." The air crackled with tension. Sophie's heart pounded. She wanted to run. She wanted to lean in. Suddenly the kitchen door burst open. "Sir!" It was Silas, his gun drawn. "Perimeter breach! Sector 4!" Lorenzo's demeanor changed instantly. The tired man vanished. The Don appeared. His eyes went cold, his posture rigid. "Where?" Lorenzo barked, pulling a sleek black handgun from the waistband of his trousers. "The delivery entrance. They used a fake courier van." "Secure my mother," Lorenzo ordered, grabbing Sophie's arm. "You come with me. I'm not leaving you out of my sight." "But Toby," Sophie screamed. "Silas has Toby. Move!" Lorenzo dragged Sophie out of the kitchen as the sound of automatic gunfire erupted in the hallway. Chaos engulfed the mansion. The alarms were blaring, a deafening, high-pitched wail. Lorenzo shoved Sophie into the library and kicked the heavy oak door shut, locking it. He pushed a massive bookshelf in front of it with inhuman strength. "Stay down," he commanded, forcing her behind the solid mahogany desk. "What is happening?" Sophie cried, covering her ears as gunfire echoed just outside the door. "An assassination attempt," Lorenzo said calmly, checking the magazine of his gun. "The Salvaros. They shouldn't have been able to get inside the gates. Someone let them in." His eyes were dark with fury. "Someone on my payroll sold me out." The door handle rattled violently. Then bullets began to chew through the wood, sending splinters flying. "Lorenzo!" Sophie screamed. "Quiet," he hissed. He moved to the side of the door, waiting. The wood gave way, and the door was kicked open. A man in tactical gear and a balaclava stormed in. Lorenzo moved like a viper. He grabbed the gunman's barrel, twisted it up, and fired 2 shots into the man's chest. The intruder dropped. 2 more men entered. Lorenzo took cover behind a leather armchair, returning fire. Bang! Bang! 1 man fell. The other ducked behind a sofa. "Give it up, Moretti!" the gunman shouted. "We have the boy!" The blood drained from Sophie's face. She stood up from behind the desk. "No! Sophie, get down!" Lorenzo roared. "We have the kid!" the gunman yelled. "Come out, or we bleed him!" Sophie didn't think. Instinct took over. She saw a heavy bronze bust of Julius Caesar on the desk. She grabbed it. While the gunman was focused on Lorenzo's position, Sophie hurled the bust with all her strength. It sailed over the sofa and struck the gunman squarely in the head with a sickening thunk. He collapsed without a sound. Lorenzo stood up, staring at her in shock. They have Toby!" Sophie panted, grabbing the gun from the dead man on the floor. She didn't know how to use it, but her hands were shaking with rage, not fear. "Where is he?" Lorenzo looked at her. This maid, this girl who cried over flowers, holding a semi-automatic weapon with the ferocity of a lioness. "Follow me," Lorenzo said. "Stay close." They moved into the hallway. Bodies of Lorenzo's guards lay on the floor. The air smelled of cordite and blood. They reached the main staircase. Below, in the foyer, 3 men were holding Toby. One had a knife to the boy's throat. Toby was crying, his face bruised. Isabella was there too, cowering on the stairs, screaming. "Let him go! Bad men! Go away!" "Drop the gun, Moretti!" the leader of the intruders shouted. He was a scarred man Sophie recognized from the news. Marco Salvaro, the rival Don's son. Lorenzo stopped at the top of the stairs. He held his gun up, showing his palms. "Let the boy go, Marco. This is between us." "The boy dies," Marco sneered. "Then the maid. Then you. Wait." Sophie stepped out from behind Lorenzo. "Sophie, no!" Lorenzo shouted. "Take me!" Sophie yelled, walking down the stairs, her hands raised. "I'm the one he cares about. Look at me. I'm the one living in his house. Let the boy go. He's nobody. Take me instead." Lorenzo froze. His heart stopped. She was offering herself as a trade. Marco looked at Sophie, then at Lorenzo. He saw the panic in Lorenzo's eyes, a panic that wasn't there for the money or the power. Marco smiled. "Well, well, the architect has a heart after all." "Fine. The girl for the boy." He shoved Toby towards the stairs. "Run, kid!" Toby scrambled up the stairs, sobbing. Sophie passed him, whispering, "Go to the safe room. Lock the door." She reached the bottom of the stairs. Marco grabbed her hair and yanked her back, pressing the cold knife against her neck. "Now," Marco grinned at Lorenzo. "Drop the gun, or I open her throat." Lorenzo dropped his gun. It clattered on the marble. "Good," Marco said. "Now kill him." He motioned to his men. But as the men raised their rifles, a shadow detached itself from the darkness of the hallway behind them. It was Silas. He was bleeding from a shoulder wound, but he was alive, and he was holding a shotgun. Boom! The man on the left disintegrated. In the confusion, Sophie stomped on Marco's foot with her heel and drove her elbow into his ribs. Marco grunted, the knife slipping. Lorenzo didn't hesitate. He vaulted over the banister, dropping 12 feet to the ground. He landed in a roll and tackled Marco before the man could recover. The fight was brutal and short. Lorenzo unleashed years of repressed rage. He broke Marco's arm with a snap, then delivered a knockout blow to the temple. Silence fell over the foyer. Lorenzo stood up, breathing hard, his knuckles bloody. He turned to Sophie. She was standing there, shaking, a thin line of blood on her neck where the knife had nicked her. "Sophie," he breathed. He crossed the distance in 2 strides and pulled her into his arms. He buried his face in her neck, holding her so tight it hurt. "You foolish, brave girl," he whispered against her skin. "You could have died." "He had Toby," she sobbed into his chest. "I couldn't let them hurt Toby." Lorenzo pulled back and cupped her face. His eyes were wild. "I would have burned the city to ash if they took you." And then he kissed her. It wasn't gentle. It was a kiss of adrenaline, of survival, of possession. It tasted of blood and fear and undeniable passion. Sophie kissed him back, gripping his shirt, anchoring herself in the storm. "Ahem." Silas cleared his throat, leaning against the wall, shotgun in hand. "Boss, we have a problem." Lorenzo broke the kiss, shielding Sophie with his body. "What?" Silas pointed his shotgun at the top of the stairs. Nurse Hopkins was standing there. She wasn't cowering. She was holding a pistol, and it was pointed directly at Isabella's head. "I'm sorry, Mr. Moretti," the nurse said, her voice trembling, but determined. "The Salvaros offered me $2 million. I have debts too." Lorenzo went deadly still. "If you hurt her, Hopkins, death will be a mercy I will not grant you." "Back off," Hopkins screamed. "Open the front door. I'm taking the old woman with me." Sophie looked at Isabella. The old woman looked confused, but not scared. She was looking at Sophie. Isabella suddenly reached into her pocket. She pulled out the pair of gardening shears Sophie had lost 3 days ago. "Bad nurse," Isabella muttered. She jammed the shears into Hopkins' thigh. Hopkins shrieked and dropped the gun. Silas moved instantly, rushing up the stairs to secure the nurse. Lorenzo looked at his mother, then at Sophie, and he started to laugh. It was a dark, relieved laugh. "My women," he said, shaking his head. "They are more dangerous than my men." But as the adrenaline faded, Sophie felt her legs give out. The world spun, and darkness took her. When Sophie opened her eyes, the world was white and smelled of antiseptic and expensive lilies. She blinked, trying to clear the fog in her brain. She wasn't in her room. She was in a hospital room, but it was unlike any she had ever seen. The walls were mahogany, the linens were silk, and the view out the window was of the Moretti private gardens. She tried to sit up, but a sharp pain in her side made her gasp. "Don't move!" The voice was rough, like gravel grinding together. Sophie turned her head. Lorenzo was sitting in a wing-back chair beside the bed. He looked terrible. His stubble had grown into a beard, his eyes were bloodshot, and he was still wearing the same blood-stained white shirt from the night of the attack. "Lorenzo," she croaked. "How long?" 2 days, he said, standing up and pouring her a glass of water with a shaking hand. He held the straw to her lips. "You lost a lot of blood. The knife missed the artery by 2 millimeters. You also have a concussion." Sophie drank greedily, the cool water soothing her parched throat. Memories of the attack came flooding back. The gunfire, Marco Salvaro, the knife at her throat. "Toby," she gasped, gripping Lorenzo's wrist. "Where is Toby?" "He's fine," Lorenzo assured her, covering her hand with his. "He's in the game room with Silas. I think Silas is teaching him how to play poker. The boy is resilient." Sophie exhaled, her body sinking back into the pillows. "And Isabella?" "She is currently baking cookies for the security team," Lorenzo said, a faint, weary smile touching his lips. "She believes she defeated the bad man with her gardening shears. She is very proud of herself." Sophie let out a weak laugh that turned into a wince. "She did. She saved us." Lorenzo's face darkened. He sat on the edge of the bed, his weight making the mattress dip. He looked at her with an intensity that made her skin prickle. "You saved us, Sophie." He reached out and traced the bandage on her neck, his touch feather-light. "I watched the security footage. You threw a bust at an armed man. You offered yourself as a hostage. You fought back." He paused, his jaw tightening. "You are the most foolish person I have ever met." "I did what I had to do," Sophie whispered. "You are a maid," Lorenzo said, his voice rising slightly. "You are supposed to hide. You are not supposed to bleed for this family." "I'm not just a maid, though, am I?" Sophie challenged him, her eyes searching his. "Not anymore." Lorenzo stared at her for a long moment. Then he reached into his pocket and pulled out a piece of paper. It was the contract she had signed 3 weeks ago, the one that gave her a salary, a home, and a set of rules. He held it up so she could see it. Then, with deliberate slowness, he tore it in half, then in quarters. He let the pieces flutter to the floor like snow. Sophie's heart dropped. "You're firing me?" Panic rose in her chest. "Lorenzo, please, I have nowhere to go. If this is about the danger, I don't care. I can't go back to that apartment. I can't. Sophie, stop." He grabbed her shoulders gently. "I am not firing you. I am voiding the contract because it is an insult to what you are to me now." He leaned in close, his dark eyes burning with possessive fire. "Employees are replaceable. You are not." "Then what am I?" Sophie asked, her breath hitching. "You are my partner," Lorenzo said firmly. "You are the woman who stood in the fire with me and didn't burn. I don't want a maid, Sophie. I have plenty of people to clean my floors. I want a queen." He took her hand and pressed a kiss to her palm. "The Salvaros are gone. Marco is in a hole he will never crawl out of. Nurse Hopkins has been dealt with. The threat is neutralized. But my world is still dangerous. It will always be dangerous." He looked deep into her soul. "I am asking you to stay. Not for the money. Not for the nursing degree. But for me. Stay and rule this city by my side." Sophie looked at the man who had terrified Chicago for a decade. She saw the monster the world feared, but she also saw the man who wiped champagne off her face, the man who loved his mother, the man who had sat by her bed for 2 days straight. She thought of her old life, the invisibility, the struggle, the cold. Then she looked at the man offering her the world. "I have conditions," she whispered, a smile tugging at the corner of her mouth. Lorenzo laughed, the sound rich and genuine. "Of course you do. Name them." "Toby goes to a real high school. No more home tutors. He needs friends." "Done. I'll have a security detail shadow him invisibly. Isabella stays with us. Always. No nursing homes. She is my mother, Sophie. I would burn the world before I sent her away." "Granted." "And one more thing," Sophie said, pulling him closer by his shirt collar. "Yes?" "You have to promise to never wear that shirt again. It's ruined." Lorenzo smirked. "I'll burn it." He leaned down and kissed her. It was a promise sealed in silence, a vow that from this moment on, they were a united front. The architect had found his foundation 6 months later. The annual Winter Solstice Charity Gala had returned to the Palmer House Hilton. The ballroom was just as opulent as it had been the year before. The chandeliers sparkled, the champagne flowed, and the elite of Chicago gathered to gossip and posture. But this year the atmosphere was different. There was a nervous energy in the air. Everyone was waiting. At the top of the grand staircase, the music swelled. "Ladies and gentlemen," the announcer's voice boomed, "Mr. Lorenzo Moretti and Mrs. Sophie Moretti." A hush fell over the room. Lorenzo appeared at the top of the stairs, looking devastating in a midnight blue tuxedo. But no one was looking at him. All eyes were on Sophie. She was wearing a gown of liquid gold that hugged every curve, designed by Versace specifically for her. Her hair, once messy and pulled back, cascaded in polished waves around her shoulders. Around her neck sat a necklace of diamonds and emeralds that was worth more than the hotel itself. But it wasn't the clothes that made the room stop. It was the way she carried herself. Gone was the hunched, tired girl with the heavy tray. In her place stood a woman who radiated power. She held her head high, her eyes scanning the crowd with a cool, calculating intelligence she had learned from her husband. She descended the stairs with Lorenzo, her hand resting lightly on his arm. They moved as one entity. As they reached the floor, the crowd parted instantly. Respect and fear cleared a path. Near the chocolate fountain, exactly where the incident had happened a year ago, stood a familiar figure. It was Beatrice Vane. The senator's wife had managed to claw her way back into a few social circles, though her reputation was tattered. When she saw Sophie, she froze. Her glass of wine trembled in her hand. Lorenzo stopped. He looked at Beatrice, then down at his wife. "Do you want me to have her removed?" he murmured. Sophie looked at Beatrice. She saw the fear in the older woman's eyes. She saw the way Beatrice's friends were slowly inching away from her, not wanting to be caught in the blast radius. Sophie smiled. It wasn't a malicious smile. It was a smile of absolute pity. "No," Sophie said loud enough for the nearby guests to hear. "Let her stay. Everyone needs to see what the past looks like. I'm only interested in the future." She turned her back on Beatrice Vane. "Champagne, my love?" Lorenzo asked, signaling a waiter. "Please," Sophie said. The waiter hurried over. It was a young girl, no older than 20, looking terrified and exhausted, her apron pinned awkwardly at the waist. Her hands were shaking as she held the tray. Sophie saw her. She saw the holes in the girl's shoes. She saw the desperation in her eyes. Sophie stopped the waiter. "What is your name?" Sophie asked gently. "Jenny, ma'am," the girl squeaked, terrified she had done something wrong. Sophie took a glass of champagne. Then she reached into her clutch and pulled out a business card. It was thick, cream-colored cardstock with the Moretti crest embossed in gold. "Jenny," Sophie said, "my grandmother needs a companion for the afternoons. It pays $30 an hour, full benefits, and we pay for tuition if you're in school. Call this number tomorrow." The girl's jaw dropped. Tears welled in her eyes. "Mom, are you serious?" "Dead serious," Sophie said. "Don't be late." Sophie turned back to Lorenzo, who was watching her with a look of pure adoration. "You're soft," he teased, wrapping his arm around her waist. "I'm not soft," Sophie replied, leaning into him. "I'm just building my own army. You have your soldiers, Lorenzo. I have the people no one else sees." Lorenzo laughed and kissed her temple. "Remind me never to cross you, Mrs. Moretti." "You better not," she whispered. They walked out onto the dance floor, the king and queen of Chicago. The music swirled around them, and for the first time in his life, Lorenzo Moretti didn't watch the exits. He didn't scan for threats. He only watched his wife. The maid who had saved his mother had not just cleaned up a mess. She had cleaned up his soul, and as they spun under the golden lights, they both knew that this was the only real life story that mattered. And that is the story of how a single act of kindness changed the destiny of the most dangerous man in Chicago. It's a reminder that sometimes strength isn't about how hard you can hit or how much money you have. Real strength is standing up for the vulnerable when everyone else is watching and laughing. Sophie Clark started as a ghost in a room full of people, but she ended up ruling the city because she had the one thing money couldn't buy: a brave heart. Lorenzo and Sophie's love story proves that even in the darkest worlds, light can find a way in, if you're willing to open the door. What would you have done if you were in Sophie's shoes? Would you have intervened, or would you have stayed safe? Let me know in the comments below. If this story moved you, please hit that like button. It really helps the channel grow. And don't forget to subscribe and ring the notification bell so you never miss a daily dose of drama, romance, and real-life storytelling. Thanks for watching, and I'll see you in the next story.